The last time I spoke like this at a church was at our home church back in Montana, the Madison Valley Presbyterian Church. And I spoke on the 7 habits of enduring happy people. Now, folks, you can't get that done in 20 minutes. And sadly, they've never asked me to speak again. My other speaking claim to fame was in 1982, I was asked to do the commencement address at the Knoxon, Montana High School. All 12 of them. 12 graduates. Due to a faulty speaker system, some people afterwards said they couldn't hear me. I said, well, that wasn't really too bad. I hope I do better today, but for those of you that are first-timers, please come back sometime when Kevin is speaking. He's very inspiring. Also, as I prepared this week for this commentary, and also we started packing to go back to our home in Montana, I was reminded that about this time last year, I'm not sure exactly what Sunday it was, but it was close to the time that we left, we had our dear friend and longtime collaborator, Dick Mall, did his last commentary with us. And I think at that occasion he spoke about being a skeptic. I don't think he sang or danced or played the piano that time, but it sure had a lot of meaning to most of us. And we certainly miss Dick, and I'd like to today dedicate my words to his memory. Thank you. So today I'm going to talk about Earth Day and what it means to me. Let us pray. Loving God, we are grateful to be gathered here in the Coachella Valley, which we share with a diversity of plants and creatures, including the peninsular bighorn sheep, Coachella Valley's fringe-toed lizard, desert sand verbena, and California fan palms. We acknowledge that this land is the traditional territory of the Cahuilla peoples. May we nourish our relationship with all our neighbors and our shared responsibilities in this watershed where we gather today, Earth Day 2018. Amen. Amen. So Earth Day is about 50 years old. 2020 will be the golden anniversary. Because it started in 1970, it reminds me of how old my daughter is, since she was born in 1970 also. Earth Day 1970 gave voice to an emerging environmental consciousness, channeling the anti-war protest movement and putting environmental concerns on the front page. Kevin is proud of his home state in Wisconsin Senator Gaylord Nelson, not Gaylord Perry, Gaylord Nelson, who is credited with being the father of Earth Day. But some would argue that Rachel Carson, who wrote Silent Spring in 1960, is the real mother of Earth Day. The first Earth Day was a national teach-in event co-chaired by Senator Nelson, and a Democrat, and Republican Congressman Pete McCloskey, California Congressman Pete McCloskey, back in the day when people really did work across the aisle. And it was held on April 22nd, falling between spring break and final exams to make sure that they got all the college students involved. And 20 million Americans responded from all walks of life on that first Earth Day in 1970. Now, over the years, Earth Day has had its ups and downs. Challenges have come from climate change deniers, well-funded oil lobbyists, reticent politicians, a disinterested public, and a divided environmental community. But Earth Day has always reunited folks and has reached its current status as the largest secular observance in the world, celebrated by over 1 billion people each year, as a day of action that changes human behavior and provokes policy change. And this year's observance focuses on climate change. And if you have been reading the newspaper today and the last week, you see all kinds of signs of what Earth Day means to us as a people. And it touches all of our lives every year. To me, Earth Day was and continues to be a worldwide wake-up call. The United Church of Christ has heard the wake-up call, and love of God's creation is one of the core elements of the three great loves initiatives of UCC. Many UCC churches, including Bloom, have programs in place to demonstrate our love for God's creation, and as we plan for a permanent home for Bloom, we will need to consider how we impact the environment as we move toward that goal. Today, the wake-up call is as strong as it was in 1970. As human populations grow and continue to put stress on our natural systems, as institutions and industries seek to maximize profits at the expense of environmental protection, and as uncaring or unthinking individuals, consumers, we make poor choices. Earth Day 1970 was meant to be a great awakening, but in many respects, we are still not woke. Rivers in Ohio aren't burning today, but kids in Flint, Michigan and Thermal, California don't have safe water to drink. Something's wrong with that. One of the artifacts of the first Earth Days is Woodsy Owl. How many of you remember Woodsy? It was a cute little mascot, and its motto was, "Give a hoot, don't pollute." Let me tell you a story about my own growth and awakening as a forester and another owl. My parents instilled a love of creation in me at a very early age, and that led me to become either a wildlife biologist or a forester, and I chose forester to fulfill that love. Living and working in the woods has provided me much spiritual sustenance through the years. I began my professional forestry career in 1965 with the U.S. Forest Service in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. As a forester, I've been trained in the science of growing, culturing, and managing trees and forests with a little soil science, hydrology, fish, wildlife, and botany thrown in. I always felt that I was doing God's work by growing sustainable forests that serve the needs of society. In the UP, the forests that we were managing consisted mostly of second growth trees. Some of those were planted by the Civilian Conservation Corps in the 1930s, and others were just naturally regenerated stands. And the reason that this was a second growth forest is because, guess what? They had cut it all down in the late 1800s and 1900s, early 1900s. The reason that, they didn't cut down. They had been cutting the old growth forest for quite a while, but the Great Chicago Fire suddenly created a huge demand for softwood lumber to rebuild the city. And this happened in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota as well. After they cut down the forest. After the logging was finished, most of the area had repeated wildfires in the untreated logging slash that was left behind. And when the smoke cleared, the denuded lands were abandoned, became tax delinquent, and then were designated as national forests, and the recovery began. The 3 Cs not only replanted the forest, but also built campgrounds, trails, and roads, which are still used today. Now, my reaction to what I saw in the 60s was to thank God for the resiliency of the land and the hard work of the 3 Cs and the earlier foresters. But I also wondered, why in the heck did they have to cut it all down? You know, there are a few examples of the original forest left in the UP and much of the lake states. When I moved to the Pacific Northwest in 1969, I could see history repeating itself. But this time it wasn't that a city burned down, it was something called the suburbs. Most of the private industrial forest lands had been harvested by the end of World War II. But the GIs came home and the baby boom started. And guess what? We went on a building craze that continues to today in some regions of our country. To meet the need for softwood lumber and plywood, Congress and the states charged the agencies with forest lands to speed up the harvest on public land, public forest. The Northwest had vast tracts of virgin fir and pine, and the cutting began. Clear cutting was the most efficient harvest system, and that's what we used. It replicated natural disturbances in producing even-age stands that could be managed into the future. But concerns over clear-cutting began initially because of the visual effects it had on people. Then there were concerns about water quality, and then finally wildlife concerns culminating in the 90s with the studies of the northern spotted owl. So here's where this little owl comes in. A Forest Service biologist observed that there was this little owl which seemed to live only in old forests. He concluded that the owl was having a hard time with all the logging that was going on, and that if the logging continued, the little owl would run out of places to live. At first, our objective was to provide enough unlogged habitat around each identified spotted owl nest tree to sustain a minimum population of owls. And we actually had people, including myself, who would go out at night and we would hoot for owls. I got pretty good at it, to find out where their nests were. One night, I remember we were hooting owls, and we actually hooted at a mountain lion. But that's another story. After litigation, of course, we were being sued. Much further research, the science evolved into taking an ecosystem approach. And this is where my personal awakening really occurred. The question wasn't just about the survival of the spotted owl, but a whole old-growth ecosystem that was full of plants, animals, natural systems that would be lost if humans continued to liquidate the old-growth forests of the Northwest. Things in God's creation really are connected. So today we have a large matrix of old forests saved just for its inherent value, and young forests actively managed for a variety of purposes. Thus my awakening and small role in the spotted owl controversy. The owl's future is just one part of the mosaic of environmental issues we face today. The argument over how public lands should be managed was a big deal and took a lot of people, turmoil, and science to finally get it right. But most of the things that are in our direct control are small things. But the small things that started with Earth Day 1970 have had a tremendous cumulative effect. For example, think of the millions of tons of plastic and cardboard and glass that we have reused and repurposed after we took recycling seriously. This winter, Kathy and I woke to the idea of not buying single-use plastic water bottles anymore. Yes, it's a little more hassle to refill them and clean them, but it makes a big difference in our minds that we are actually doing something positive for the environment. Likewise, in our other choices, we have many other choices that we make about how we live and what we purchase, and we can make a difference. Now, I can't let this opportunity to slip by without tying in social justice.
Good for you.
It's no secret that worldwide, disadvantaged people bear the biggest load of environmental degradation and pollution. Within the UCC, creation justice churches have sprung up, which are asking, what kind of a future do we want to leave for our children? And they're taking on an amazing variety of actions to bring environmental justice to their communities. But folks, there's a lot more to be done. In closing, I'd like to quote from Aldo Leopold, another forester and a conservation hero of mine, who taught me to think like a mountain. He wrote his seminal Sam County Almanac about his small farm in Wisconsin. He says in his journals, "We shall never achieve perfect harmony with the land any more than we shall achieve absolute justice or liberty for people. In these higher aspirations, the important thing is not to achieve, but to strive." So, dear Bloom friends, let us heed the wake-up call. Let us continue to strive to find ways to show our love for God's creation and all that we do, our words and our deeds. Thank you.